Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno here with my co-host, Harris Faulkner. And also joining us today, Fox News contributor and author of the newly released book, Fear Itself, Tammy Bruce. Fox News contributor and host of Tomi Lahren is Fearless on Outkick, Tomi Lahren. And Fox News contributor and former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Now, tomorrow marks 2 weeks since the assassination attempt against Donald Trump. We all watched in horror when the former president was almost killed at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Something that said, take a look at what happened. Oh.
Now, in this photo, you can see the bullet whizzing by the president. It is circled on your screen. A turn of his head saved his life. And we all saw the images of Trump bloodied in the moment after he escaped death, fist raised in the air, shouting, "Fight." But FBI Director Christopher Wray is telling us not to believe our eyes. Testifying on Capitol Hill about the investigation, he claims it might not have been a bullet after all.
With respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that hit his ear.
Former President Donald Trump was not happy with that remark, posting on Truth Social, quote, "The FBI never checked. It was unfortunately a bullet that hit my ear and hit it hard. There was no glass. There was no shrapnel. The hospital called it a bullet wound to the ear, and that is what it was. No wonder the once storied FBI has lost the confidence of America." Jason Chaffetz, I also want to read the FBI releasing a statement today about Wray's testimony, and it reads in part, "Since the day of the attack, the FBI has been consistent and clear that the shooting was an attempted assassination of former President Trump, which resulted in his injury. FBI Director Wray provided extensive congressional testimony on Wednesday about the FBI's investigation. This was a heinous attack, and the FBI is devoting enormous resources to learn everything possible about the shooter and what led to his attack, what led to his act of violence." Your thoughts?
I can't believe the FBI would do this. Common sense. Look at it. The president is turning. His right ear is the one that was shot. It's off to the side. There's not a teleprompter behind the president. The teleprompter was in front of the president. The guy was shot. He's bleeding with his out of his ear. You can see him when he's down for the count, down on the ground, making sure he doesn't get shot again. It's unbelievable that they would come up with this scenario. Why isn't the FBI director just saying the president was shot? Now let's talk about how did the gun get on the roof? How did the shooter get on the roof? Those are the types of questions America wants to know, because we want to make sure it never, ever happens again. Instead, they're playing these little games trying to distract from the fact that the Secret Service failed to do its job.
And that's the point, Tammy, that the questions being asked, it's not about these details. It's about how did this happen and how can we prevent it from happening beginning now?
And look, so that comment, which effectively encourages a conspiracy theory, becomes the conversation. And even in the statement afterwards, resulted in injury. Wow. It's like he tripped.
Yeah.
It's like, remember the original headlines were Trump falls. Remember that? And that it was this denial. So even in the aftermath, reinforcing, we're not sure what happened to Donald Trump. There is photographic evidence, a remarkable photograph, some of which will win probably Pulitzer Prizes with that day, of the bullet there. He was turned. So look, we have Corey, who got murdered, who got killed. It was at the far end of the bleacher there between the shooter and President Trump. And then the other two who were injured on the other side of President Trump at the end, as the bullets were going back and forth. There is no shrapnel. It was in the space of the bullets moving from the top of the roof to the end of those bleachers with all those people injured. So the teleprompter, there was confirmation at the time, the teleprompters were not broken. None of that happened. There is no reason for the FBI director to cast doubt on what happened when they can't even provide us the reasons why it happened, how it happened, and how they failed. I worry about, like, the Las Vegas shooting. To this day, that mass shooting from that hotel window, We have never been given information about how it happened and why it happened. We can't let that happen right now.
And fleshing out the casting of the doubt, let's show what Newsweek tweeted out just moments after the congressional testimony by Ray. Donald Trump might not have been shot after all.
Why is the media, what is their stake in trying to downplay an assassination attempt on a former and likely future president? What stake do they have in that? Why would they try to diminish what happened? Why would they try to distract from what happened? I understand if the FBI is testifying and Director Wray says whatever he wants to say about the investigation and he says maybe there's more investigation that needs to happen, okay. But for the media to run with it gleefully, to almost exclaim, hey, listen, this assassination attempt that may have helped Donald Trump's campaign, it might not have been as bad as you all thought it was. What is their stake in that beyond just trying to downplay an assassination attempt, which is also dangerous? But from day one, we've been hearing from the left that political violence, they've been condemning it, which is great. I appreciate it. At this hearing, you had several Democrats talk about the attempts on Speaker Pelosi and her husband taking a hammer to the head and how that was awful and how there were right-wing conspiracy theorists that tried to deny it. But then they turn right around when they get this little tiny tidbit of information that perhaps they could delegitimize an assassination attempt, and they are so excited to amplify that. I don't know what it does for them, but it's worth asking that question as well.
Well, I'm really curious about how politicized the FBI has become. I think it's a fair question given where we are in this scenario. So Donald Trump in recent days has been saying, I took a bullet for democracy. That is hard for the left to push back on. It might need everybody to help push back on that. I just received this. It's dated today. We know we've been getting updates from Ronnie Jackson, now a congressman, former physician to the president. So he was very close to Trump in the White House. He said, I have reviewed President Trump's medical records from Butler Memorial Hospital. This is a letter that I'm sure other journalists are getting it now, where he was initially evaluated and treated for a gunshot wound to the right ear, in quotes. Having served as an emergency med physician for over 20 years in the U.S. Navy, including a combat physician and battlefield in Iraq, I've treated many gunshot wounds in my career. Based on my direct observations of the injury, my relevant clinical background, and my significant experience evaluating and treating patients with similar wounds, I completely concur with the initial assessment and treatment provided by doctors and nurses at Butler Memorial Hospital on the day of the shooting. It goes on to say, there is absolutely no evidence that it was anything other than a bullet. Congress should correct the record as confirmed by both the hospital and myself. And then it says, and this is what you pointed to, I fully understand the global significance of this attempt, Tommy, because that's what you were talking about, on the life of former president and the current Republican nominee for president. As such, I want to reassure the American people and the rest of the world that President Trump is doing extremely well. Dr. Ronnie Jackson.
There you go. But I really appreciate the question that you were asking, Tommy. We can discuss this for a moment. Is that what end is it? The most unified I've ever seen the House was actually when former Director Cheadle was testifying, and unanimously everyone condemned that this could have happened. So what happened to that? Why is the media coming in stage left and trying to stoke fraction?
Because I took a bullet for democracy.
Well, yes, because it's hard to push back. But I would suggest also the Democrats should have an interest. When you try to gaslight away from the problem, you can't solve the problem. And I worry about everyone in the field. Kamala Harris, whoever her vice president choice is going to be, if she becomes the nominee, every media person, everyone in politics, everyone in a local race, until this puts everyone at risk. If you're going to ignore it, it means you can't fix it.
The director of the FBI, he's got to be smarter than taking the bait. There was no evidence to the contrary. And instead of addressing the number one issue, which is how did a man with the guns get so close to the president of the United States? How did the Secret Service totally fail? How come the extraction didn't happen the way it was supposed to? What happened with the drone? Why wasn't there a drone? Why weren't this person on the radar? How come there wasn't the locals able to say, hey, see something, say something, right? The motto of the Homeland Security. None of that happened. Why didn't he address that as hard as he did this?
I'm so glad you're here, but I wish you were still in Congress, Jason.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.